Hey guys, I'm learning TFT. In this video, I'm going to go through Dishsoap's most recent VOD review video on YouTube where he went through his regionals run where he got top 4 in 24 out of his 25 games. And I went through a bunch of his games and took away my general takeaways and learnings from it. So think of this as a kind of cliff notes, key learnings type video for Dish Soap's video, whether you've seen it before and want to kind of reinforce those learnings, or maybe you haven't seen his video and want to get the key takeaways. So these are all kind of fundamental ideas that should be useful across any patch or set. And I'm trying to abstract the learnings to take away from patch specific stuff and more to generalized learnings that we can apply to our game, even thinking about going into set 14, PBE, or later on. So these are the general takeaways that I had, and then I'll go through each game. I have screenshots and kind of specific examples of what happened and the key takeaways. So on 2-1 specifically, Dishsoap consistently prioritizes econ if his board is not strong, if he's not playing for win streak in stage 2. If he doesn't have direction and he's not strong, he will also prioritize trying to pick an augment that will give him more direction, which involves getting whether that's getting an emblem or some type of clear direction that makes his game plan a lot simpler to play. And he mentioned many times that he tends to avoid generic team combat augments on 2-1 since it's just not strong. And he does also prioritize item augments if strong to amplify his ability to try to streak stage 2. As far as items go, he specifically talks frequently about having your item components influence what units you decide to hold. There was one example that stood out to me where he had a Morgana 2 that he could have bought in shop, but was waiting to see if he would drop a tier off of neutrals. And when he didn't, he sold all of the Morganas to play around the item components. So you want to have your item components influence what units you hold and not the other way around, because item components are scarce and fixed, whereas units are much more flexible and are not fixed. You can modify them. He played a lot of Vi encounters where he consistently prioritized econ augments on Vi encounters. Because you have more items in the early game, you can get a 3-item carry by like 3-2. And therefore, you want to have gold in order to hit your 3 stars. And he also prioritizes hero augments a lot more on item encounter situations. As far as scouting goes, he's consistently scouting. And there were many times in these games where when he was unsure of the direction he wanted to take, or even when it would seem to a normal player, for example, that he's going down an AP Sork line, but he sees that there's 4 other players playing AP or 5 other players playing AP, and he actively scouts and thinks about how to eliminate those contested options to find a clear path forward that is not contested. All right, so I will also include a link to my notes, this page, in the description below. So I included links to all of these games so you can jump straight to them if you want. Prioritize econ on 2-1 if not strong. So this is a situation where he has an Amumu pair, not really much of a strong board, not really a clear slammable item here. And so when he's looking at these augments, he really wants to figure out a way to prioritize econ, which isn't an option here, but like delayed strength BRB was the one that he was leaning towards. And after he rolled, these were the options. And so he was saying that BRB and Salvage Bin, he kind of valued about the same. But even if you slightly prefer BRB over Salvage Bin, he would say that it's worth rolling BRB just to get a better chance at an econ augment, because that's significantly better in this spot than either of these two. And then if you have no clear direction and you're not strong, then pick the augment that gives you direction. So after he rolled the BRB, Wandering Trainer, given that his board's not strong and he doesn't have direction, Wandering Trainer can give him a lot more direction. And then he says, when you have two possible lines you can go down, wait until you have a clear indicator to go down one over the other. So in this case, Experiment Dominator are the exact traits that Mundo has. And so he was saying that he could play either down a Dominator line or a Twitch line. And basically he's saying to be patient and wait until you find some type of indicator, whether that's you high roll an early Twitch, or you high roll an early Silco, or you get an augment that really leans you in one direction or the other instead of committing right off the bat. So, and then also actively scout to see which opponents may be contesting each of those directions. In this case, he comes across both Pyromaniac and Mana Flow. Pyro is good for Twitch, Mana Flow is good for Silco. And in this case, he was basically saying, if you're not sure which one, just 50-50, you can flip a coin, pick one, and commit to it. This is a very common theme that he talked about in this video, is committing. In the situations where he committed too late, he was saying repeatedly that was a mistake. So the earlier that you can commit, the better, because then you can focus your resources on getting to the direction you want to get to. You have a clear game plan, and you get a lot less dizzy. Game 2 was a Vi encounter, and by the way, he constantly talks about how the encounter that he plays on influences the decisions that he makes. Specifically for Vi, he really wants to prioritize reroll lines because he can force Bis and often not lose streak early when you're playing reroll, compared to no encounter, where because even if you hit your 2 stars, because you have fewer items, those units are not going to be able to carry your fights as much. Prioritize econ augments heavily, since you don't need items when you have extra item components, and the extra gold allows you to force to what you want to play. And have your item components guide which line you want to angle toward. So in this case, he got a teardrop, which makes Morgana much more appealing. If he didn't have a tier, he would argue that it's probably worth selling out of Morgana and maybe the Visionaries. Although in this case, it's probably worth holding the Chem Baron, but he probably would have sold the Visionaries for alternate lines. Portable Forge with item component can give you 3 item carry Bis early. So even though on Vi encounter, he was saying usually you don't want more items because you already have enough items. But specifically for this Vi encounter, Portable Forge can be good because oftentimes, like let's say you get a ranged artifact for Nocturne, you may not have slammable, second or third items, but with the item anvils or component anvils, you can get a 3 item carry much sooner. So oftentimes that can make sense. But he saw someone was hard forcing Smeech, which took away some of the outs for Portable Forge with what is it, the artifact that lets you jump around, or not jump around. I forget which Smeech artifact he was referring to, but because that removes some of the artifact outs, he leaned towards Starry Night, which he prefers econ anyway. And he likes Starry Night a lot more than Raining Gold. So he rolled Raining. He was willing to take Portable Forge over Raining Gold. And this goes back to the idea that he talked about earlier around if there are 2 augments that are similar in value, it can oftentimes be worth rolling the other one to get an even better one. And then when deciding between reroll lines, lean toward the direction you have components for. So in this case, he could decide to go Morgana reroll, he could go Triss reroll, and he's actually saying right now it's obvious because he can have blue buff for Morgana reroll, but if he had like sword, gloves, bows, he would instead be leaning much more towards Tristana reroll here. So again, going back to really having your item components guide the direction that your game goes in. Next is Ambessa encounter. He says that my high roll is going to come later and I want to have the gold to capitalize around that. So Econ Augment, especially in the early game when you're not necessarily strong, gives you a lot more options later on in the game. So what doesn't kill you in this case gives him that opportunity to high roll later. And this was I think he had like Pit Fighter, Black Rose, and I forget what the third one was. But he waited later for the opportunity. Oh, it was Bruiser and Black Rose. So that's why like Elise made a lot of sense, and Pit Fighter. But he didn't commit to a single direction at 3/3/2 to keep things flexible, which allowed him to have the 2 pit fighter emblems, which gives you the opportunity to get 8 pit fighter. And by playing flexibly, he could also have gotten +2 on the black rose side. And now he has the extra gold to capitalize on it, because you still do need to hit Vi 2 on 8 to stabilize, and to be able to either high roll or have enough gold to high roll the Savika on 8, or to be able to push 9 to get the 8 pit fighter. And then in this case, because he had the extra gold from What Doesn't Kill You, he went 8 and rolled down on neutrals, because there was someone else that was contesting Vi. So in this case, if no one was contesting Vi, he probably would have waited until 4-1. But because someone's contesting his desired forecast, and it's extremely important for him to hit that forecast, and assuming you have the gold to do so, then sometimes it's worth rolling on neutrals. Another Vi encounter, reroll strong with extra components. Hero augments are really strong with the extra items where you can force Bis. And so he was basically saying he generally avoids hero augments on encounters. Basically, Dishsoap said he only picks hero augments for the most part on encounters like Vi encounter or Jace encounter, where he gets extra items or artifacts. I mean, I'm sure he has exceptions to that rule, where if he had like 4 stabs and like, a slammable like JG or something, like he would still take it. But like he said, yeah, 80 to 90% of the time, he'll pick hero augments on these specific encounters. Plus, he already had a stab pair, so it was like a very easy decision. Next game, Victor's encounter. He said not worth buying 2-star 1 costs if they're heavily item dependent. So this was the example I brought up earlier. He could have bought a Morgana 2, and he waited until he saw this glove drop. And as a result of the glove drop, because it's not a tier, because Morgana is very reliant on blue buff, he sold this pair in order to buy other units. And he said this unit doesn't do anything without blue buff. And so he bought these units instead. And on augment selection, because this board wasn't that strong, unclear as far as item slams go. Like, he could slam IE, but he doesn't really have, a 2-star AD carry right now. One of the options that he was presented with was Heroic Grab Bag, which normally you would think you would do if you already had like a Swain or GP or Smeech and a slammable item for tempo. But he actually says he'll often consider Heroic Grab Bag as insurance for your reroll comp or low roll protector, and you can duplicate it as late as stage 2 or early stage 3. You might be able to find, if you lose streak early, you might be able to get first carousel priority and find a Swain, GP, or Smeech and play around one of those. Or if you just natural one of those, that it's basically you played a delay tempo version as if you had Swain on 2-1. Or we'll see later, you can just roll level to 6 and do a pretty aggressive roll down 3-2, and then play around the first 3 costs that you hit and have a 2-star 3 cost for stage 3. But in this case, with a weak opener, he would just pick the Econ Augment, which he'd value What Doesn't Kill You over Hero Grab Bag in this situation. With What Doesn't Kill You, he argues you can lose streak into Quick Striker reroll and deep roll down on 3-5. And losing Econ makes sense if playing toward that angle, so he's holding the Quick Strikers, and he's willing to lose out on interest threshold. But then he saw that someone was contesting Quick Strikers with ranged Nocturne, and so it was a mistake to lose Econ for that, because he never wants to contest. So he said, one of my rules for myself, I'm not going to contest a reroll comp. So then he sold out of the Quick Strikers, and so even though he lost, a gold of interest from that, he doesn't fall prey to sunk cost fallacy and saying well, I held it last round, so I should keep holding it, right? That's definitely sunk cost fallacy. So contesting is bad, but it's even worse from loss streak. And in this case, he was saying that it's also worth losing Econ interval to hold Chem Baron in the early game. So in this case, he could have held the Renata and Singe, especially because his items, he basically has a half component of the Smeech, Bis, Titans, BT, Hodge. And with what doesn't kill you, it works really well into 3-cost reroll since you want to really stabilize usually around 3-5 and just like full loss streak until 3-5, and then be able to really hard stabilize and hopefully win out from there. And playing around Chem Baron really lets him do that. He also next round had access to a Rennie. Plus, because he's lose streaking, he would get first carousel priority, which gives him a high likelihood of filling in the missing Chem Baron pieces. So he said Chem Baron's extremely broken if you know how to play it this patch, especially with the what doesn't kill you augment. Next game, 6 Vi encounter said know what 3 costs are strong and worth playing around. In this case, he got dropped a Smeech and a TF, and he was willing to play around either depending on what item components were dropped. And because Glove here is like slightly better for Smeech, Tier Rod would be really good for the TF. And commit to a line based on item components. And so he gets dropped Glove Bow, which leans much more to TF. It could be, or sorry, leans much more to Smeech. It could be for TF, but definitely much more for Smeech. And Smeech usually can kill more units in the early game than TF. Plus, he has 2 Chem Barons, so it's definitely makes more sense to lean in that direction. Prioritize econ when you have extra item resources. So we talked about this on Vi encounter. In this case, lunch money is high variance, not guaranteed, whereas crafting is basically econ. He wants to lean towards reroll on a Vi encounter, and on Vi encounter with the anvils, you get extra components, so you basically get more gold than you usually would with this augment. So in this case, what item component would you pick? Is it worth slamming for tempo or greeting for faster bis? Obviously, in this case, he would prefer a BT and Titans, but he low rolls here. And so one option would be to get a bow and slam a red buff, which is what he does here. But he actually says that that was a mistake because it delayed his Titans by a lot. Instead, he probably should have picked a glove here, like open glove for like Echo for later, and not slammed. And then once he hits the Chem Baron, he finds the Rennie and the Singe. And then he commits to Lost Streak with Chem Baron and intentionally tries to lose to get access to the Chem Baron stacks. So again here, only buys the Morganas if he gets a teardrop. Vi encounter again, econ is good, but one thing that he did call out specifically is Slammin' is econ, right? But it works in the opposite like kind of intention as what you want with reroll, because it helps you push levels, and when you are playing reroll, that gold then becomes less valuable once you hit the desired target level for your max odds for, if you're playing 2-cost or 3-cost reroll. And so he would not consider Slammin' an optimal econ augment for reroll. Instead, he takes Cat 5, even though it gives him more items, and then flexes between Draven and Ezreal reroll. And with item component anvils, like you increase your odds of getting another Runons, like double up on the Runons as well. One thing, terminology he used, I think he mentioned this multiple times, is he considers multiple lines in terms of probabilities. So he said from this spot, he would consider it 80% family, 20% Ezreal. Mainly if he sees a shop that has, like, for example, something like this with an Ezreal, then it would increase his likelihood of going in an Ezreal direction. But not thinking in terms of black and white and like saying like, oh, I'm going to hard commit. Like he keeps things flexible to a certain degree, but willing to commit when the big kind of inflection point or the aha moment comes, or what he calls like kind of the high roll moment, right? So if he high rolled a Ezreal spot, then like there was a 2 Ezreal shop, for example, then he's willing to pivot. But he's never so tunnel vision that he's not willing to consider the other possibilities. Game 8, Heimer, last is Prismatic. This is the low roll protection heroic grab bag game where he has like an okay opener, not great. He does have a 2-star Zyra here, but no real slammable items. So in this case, though, he has like a perfect spot that if he hits one single Swain whether that's natural or off of carousel, he can then duplicate it and have a really amazing Sork potential. Or he could go towards GP and Ezreal because he could slam like a Last Whisper. So this is like the case where, and you want to make sure you're uncontested and scout, by the way. But this is a case where he does like Heroic Grab Bag and picks it to kind of flex between those options. Unfortunately, he did lose streak early, didn't find a Swain off of carousel, didn't natural a Swain. So instead on 3-2, he actually does a pretty aggressive roll down to find a 3 cost to duplicate. And then this is like kind of what he talks about as the quote high roll moment, where he already had an Ezreal, finds another Ezreal and a Corki in shop, and that's when he commits to duplicating the Ezreal, and then he can slam like I forget what he reforged the vest, I believe, and then that was a cloak. So I believe he made IE Runons and has a 3-item 2-star 3 cost on stage 3, which allows him to really stabilize his mid game. He then further, oh never mind, he got a Rage Blade instead. He then furthermore scouts the lobby to see what frontline opponents are playing to determine viable lines to pivot into. And so even though he's already playing Ezreal, which normally you would think would lean into like Academy line, he saw that a bunch of his opponents were playing Sentinels and likely playing around Alawi. So at that point, he didn't even want to contest Alawi, even though that was the natural line he was on. And so from there, he was like, ideally, I'm going to play Twitch or Corki Emissary as a secondary option. And so this goes back to scouting actively to see what opponents are doing and avoiding contested lines. Next one was a Vi encounter with item components. And so gloves off, hero augment, very good. He was like, this is just a very obvious decision. Next one, Victor. This is a scenario where he was trying to decide between making 10 gold or holding the extra units. And he ended up holding all of the units, mainly because he really likes Swain. But he was saying that the only position that he would really play Swain over committing to family reroll here is if someone else called family, and he like hits like heroic what was it, the two lesser duplicators, or like a Conqueror emblem. But he said even if a Conqueror emblem showed up at augment selection, he'd probably still commit family unless someone else was going to contest him. So in that case, he believes it was a mistake to not make 10 gold here. Plus, even if he were to play around Swain, he was saying he doesn't have a good slammable item for Swain, so it doesn't really make as much sense, especially since for Conqueror, you want to be able to tempo to get the Conqueror stacks and econ. He argues, he's said multiple times you want to avoid generic combat augment on 2-1, like bulky buddies. And then risky moves is more viable as an econ opener with a strong opener and good item slam. The problem is right now he has a belt cloak, Even Shroud, which for this board is not really a great slam if you want to play family. And then so instead he rolled it and found these options, which Pandora's Bench, he was saying, is really good for 1-cost reroll, especially on 2-1, because holding 2 or 3 cost units in the early game is really expensive to your long-term, just missing a bunch of interest thresholds. So it makes more sense to take Pandora's Bench for 2 and 3 cost reroll on 3-2 if you're both really rich and healthy, because you really need time. And if you are on a gold opener like he was in this game, 1-cost reroll for Pandora's Bench is really valuable. Next game was Victor encounter. Again, he would default to econ for a poor opener, no 2 stars, no slammable items here. No 2-star tank for a Stoneplate Slam. A cloak is what dropped out of this orb. And in this case, he says good for something is good when you have no slammable items and you're weak. You can kind of view this if you level up to 4 on 2-1 as basically you have an expected value of 2 gold per round, which is actually pretty good for a silver augment. And if you were already weak anyway, so you're likely going to loss streak. And at this point, he says he's 100% committed to a single comp, which I was very surprised by, but he explained it later and it made a lot of sense to me. So if you want to pause the video and run that exercise yourself, you can do that. And the direction that he says he's leaning towards is specifically 3-cost reroll. This is similar to the what doesn't kill you idea. He expects that he's going to full loss streak stage 2 and early stage 3, which means he's going to be probably around 40 HP by like 3-5, 40 or 50 HP by 3-5, because he's not going to slam items to maximize his gold value for the most part. And so you really need a comp that's able to stabilize in stage 3 and stage 4, which he says for fast 8, it can be viable in some patches where you can really stabilize, like Scrap in that one patch, or like Callista from set 12. But right now there's no fast 8 comps that are really good at stabilizing, because you really need to instantly hit your 2-star 4 costs, which can be hard to do. But 2-star 3 costs on 3-5 with a lot of gold is very feasible. So in that case, he's basically saying from this spot, he's almost 100% committed to quick strikers. And the basic idea is that you don't have enough HP to play for fast 8. And yeah, the other option he mentioned was Chem Baron Visionaries, if he got early Chem Barons in. And then I would even add that he didn't mention this, but I would probably consider Chem Baron Ambushers, like Smeech Reroll as well, as a possible option. And probably you would be guided by the item components and what units you natural. So this goes back to what Dishsoap talked about around like kind of being patient and seeing what high roll spot you get for the lines that can kind of naturally direct you in a certain direction. On 3-2, he has a lot of gold because he's playing around good for something, and he's committed to playing Quick Striker Reroll. So he really wants to prioritize an item augment, and in this case, Buried Treasures will really let him get 3 fully itemized, like ideally Akali 3 and TF3. And then he rolls really deep on 3-5. He rolls to 10 gold. He was on an 8 loss streak, right? He's at 49 HP, which is kind of the zone that I was talking about before. He's going to get a lot of item components here. He has a full 2-star Akali, 2-star TF. So his board at this point looks reasonably stable. He's at 4 Quick Striker to stop the bleeding. And then the interesting thing here is that he's very flexible with how he approaches, especially 3-cost reroll. And Quick Strikers is very flexible to play. If you are behind on tempo in hitting your 3 stars, so first off, you could say for Quick Strikers, you can roll on level 6 for 2-cost reroll. You can roll on level 7 for 3-cost reroll. So if you're hitting a bunch of Akalis, you can roll on 6 for 3-star Akali. If you're hitting a bunch of TFs and Lorises, you can roll for those. And he's saying if you are not really hitting any of them, and let's say you hit like, you know, Alawi and Mbessa early, then you could just push 8, try to play around 2-star Mbessa, 2-star TF, and just tempo it. And so that's exactly what he did. On 4-2, he picked Call to Chaos, which gave him a lot of gold or XP to push levels. And he just used that tempo advantage to put a lot of pressure on the lobby, deal a lot of damage to the opponents. And as a result of that, he win streaked all of stage 4 and early stage 5. He did high roll the Share Your Energy anomaly, which is like the best anomaly for this Quick Striker line by a lot, because you put it on Rel and she benefits from both 4 Sentinel and the Conqueror stacks, which is huge value. And he finished top 2 despite not hitting, I forget if he ended up hitting a 3-star, but I don't think my understanding is for most of the game, he didn't hit a single 3-star, even though Quick Striker is his, quote, a reroll line. He saw the benefits of his spot to push tempo and salvage the situation where I think for most players, we would reroll and then miss and just like, you know, go bot 4 and complain to Warthog. But he found the one line that made the most sense in that situation, pushed tempo, high rolled this anomaly, and ended up getting second. All right, in this spot, he has, it's a Vi encounter again. He knows he wants to lean towards reroll. In this case, I think most people, including myself, would probably pick up, you know, the Sentinels. But he actually picks up the Nocturne over the Leona because he does have 80 items, and he wanted to give himself the high roll opportunity to get a portable forge on 2-1 and look for a ranged artifact. And again, on buy encounter, he wants to look for econ to lean towards reroll, even though trade sector just is kind of mid as for a kind of econ augment. He still goes in that direction because he's on a buy encounter. So really keep sticking with the game plan of more gold when you already have more items. In this game, he ends up taking thorn-plated armor because he has a 2-star singe. He wants to play for streak, but he argues that this was a mistake because while he was scouting, he noticed that there were 5 opponents leaning AP, and he didn't really actively consider that. It did help him full streak early game, so this can be still a solid top 4, top 5 strategy, but it fell off hard late game because everyone else was playing AP. And then in this spot, this seems like a pretty obvious, like as far as unit standpoint goes, AP line. He could switch towards like an academy line too because he has AD components. Even though he was leaning heavily AP, he reforged the vest into this cloak. And with the Ezreal in shop, getting a Runon's IE was enough to convince him to pivot AD since the majority of the lobby was AP. And so this goes back to, again, even though he's full streaking, he has like a bunch of the sorcerer pairs and like literally only this Ezreal to convince him AD. Because the lobby was heavily AP, he does not want to contest that even when he's playing from ahead. So again, this is a big theme in Dishsoap's games where he's actively scouting and avoiding contested lines, whether that's reroll or the fast 8 lines. Next game, Echo all prismatic. Play around the components. So in this case, he's basically saying, I'm not going to play around AP, I'm not going to play around this Nami, or like this Morgana. I don't have a tier. And then from here, he did have a Darius 2 in the shop. And because he has a slammable, here he gets a cloak. So he has a slammable BT, Sterak, and Pit Fighter. He can get a fully itemized 3-item Darius right off the bat with Pit Fighter crown. He was saying that Pit Fighter is usually not a great comp because it falls off in the mid game and you need to hit a Vi 2 right away. But this is a specific spot that it makes sense to play because he can get that full 3-item carry. And so this is, again, a big theme when he talked about all these Vi encounters. Even though this was not a Vi encounter, the general principle still applies that if you can get a 2-star fully itemized carry in the early mid game, that can give you the opportunity to full streak, which gives you a huge advantage in the early mid game, gives you opportunity to high roll later, or get a safe top 4. So tempo, Pit Fighter heavily rely on hitting Vi 2 in stage 4, but if you're playing from ahead, you have both the gold and the tempo in order to do that. And this is an idea that he was saying is even bad comps are worth playing if you have the god openers for them. And this is basically a god opener for Pit Fighter. All right, Vi encounter again prefers econ better than combat augment with a weak opener. But in this case, he doesn't really have a strong board here. He does have some pairs, some possible slammable items if he's able to hit. But he would not really consider Spoils of War because he just doesn't have enough. Like, he doesn't have the 2-star units to justify it at this point. He took Cloning Facility, and in this game, he was playing around a TF2 in the mid game. He was contested on the Quick Striker line, so he said, I'm not going to play reroll TF. I'm going to tempo, and he was playing flexibly between Rebels and Sork. So you can see how he's holding all the Rebel units here. He's holding the Sork units here. And he said, I should have committed earlier. Once he hit the LeBlanc, he was saying, I should have just full open sold all of the Rebel line and just been able to do the roll down. Because you can see here it's 4-5. And he's holding so much gold on his bench. And also the mental capacity to have to consider both lines is just too dizzying. And causes him to not be able to make the optimal play. And he lost a lot of HP by not being able to commit to a full roll down. Plus, when you're rolling down and trying to flex between 2 lines, you just get bench locked a lot. And so he was basically saying the moment he got this LeBlanc off carousel, he should have open sold all of the non-Sork line and then just committed. All right, game 16, he said this was the most obvious decision point. He has Trist pair with an IE slam on neutral, so yeah, Trist reroll. Vying counter for this game, if you can build a 3-item carry in stage 2, even if you can't win rounds, we'll be able to kill units. So in the previous example, there was a Spoils of War where he didn't have a 2-star unit yet, so it didn't make sense as an econ augment. But in this case, he has the Vex 2 and a bunch of items that he can basically get a fully itemized Vex 2. So Spoils of War here makes a lot of sense. He again commented that combat on 2-1 does not make sense. And so Spoils of War is essentially his econ augment to play reroll, or at least try to angle reroll on Vying counter. And then in this game, he picked Family Crest. And he said right off the bat, even after picking that on 2-1, he wanted to lean towards a lost streak on stage 2, mainly so that he could get carousel priority, so that if he high rolled a spatula off carousel, he can instantly get a 5 family, and that would be kind of like an Exodia line that he could angle toward. So just always keeping in mind where you can get a huge kind of advantage on your lobby, and if that means that getting carousel access can give you a huge advantage, even if it's 5-10% of the time, you could just instantly win the game. That's a very high EV play at low risk. So always keeping that in mind. All right, so I hope you enjoy this format of my reviewing Dishsoap's games. If you do, I'd appreciate if you let me know that you liked it, that you want to see more of this kind of stuff. I would love to hear your thoughts, comments, feedback on any of the examples that I brought up. It'd be helpful if you could use timestamps in the comments. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.